Hello, the continuation of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel Benard. The last time we were talking about the nurse, I might have said something like, when he rang, after a time she would appear at once, and then he would say, "I think I'd rather you shaved me this morning." And her heart gave a little thrill, and she replied with extra softness, "Very good, Sir Clifford." She was very deft with a soft, lingering touch, a little slow. At first he had resented the infinitely soft touch of her lingers on his face, but now he liked it, with a growing voluptuousness. He let her shave him nearly every day, her face near his, her eyes so very concentrated, watching that she did it right. And gradually her fingertips knew his cheeks and lips, his jaw and chin and throat perfectly. He was well-fed and well-liking. His face and throat were handsome enough, and he was a gentleman. She was handsome too, pale, her face rather long and absolutely still, her eyes bright, but revealing nothing. Gradually, with infinite softness, almost with love, she was getting him by the throat, and he was yielding to her. She now did almost everything for him, and he felt more at home with her, less ashamed of accepting her menial offices than with Connie. She liked handling him. She loved having his body in her charge, absolutely to the last menial offices. She said to Connie one day, "All men are babies when you come to the bottom of them. Why, I've handled some of the toughest customers as ever went down Tevershall Pit. But let anything ail them so that you have to do for them, and they're babies, just big babies. Oh, there's not much difference in men." At first, Mrs. Bolton had thought there really was something different in a gentleman, a real gentleman, like Sir Clifford. Sir Clifford had got a good start of her, but gradually, as she came to the bottom of him, to use her own term, she found he was like the rest, a baby, grown to a man's proportions, but a baby with a queer temper and a fine manner and power in its control, and all sorts of odd knowledge that she had never dreamed of, with which he could still bully her. Connie was sometimes tempted to say to him, "For God's sake, don't sink so horribly into the hands of that woman." But she found she didn't care for him enough to say it in the long run. It was still their habit to spend the evening together till 10 o'clock. Then they would talk or read together or go over his manuscript. But the thrill had gone out of it. She was bored by his manuscripts, but she still dutifully typed them out for him. But in time, Mrs. Bolton would do even that. For Connie had suggested to Mrs. Bolton that she should learn to use a typewriter, and Mrs. Bolton, always ready, had begun at once and practiced assiduously. So now, Clifford would sometimes dictate a letter to her, and she would take it down rather slowly, but correctly. And he was very patient, spelling for her the difficult words or the occasional phrases in French. She was so thrilled. It was almost a pleasure to instruct her. Now Connie would sometimes plead a headache as an excuse for going up to her room after dinner. "Perhaps Mrs. Bolton will play piquet with you," she said to Clifford. "Oh, I shall be perfectly all right. You go to your own room and rest, darling." But no sooner had she gone than he rang for Mrs. Bolton and asked her to take a hand at piquet or bézique or even chess. He had taught her all these games. And Connie found it curiously objectionable to see Mrs. Bolton, flushed and tremulous like a little girl, touching her queen or her knight with uncertain fingers, then drawing away again. And Clifford, faintly smiling with a half-teasing superiority, saying to her, "You must say, j'adoube." She looked up at him with bright, startled eyes, then murmured shyly, obediently, "J'adoube." Yes, he was educating her, and he enjoyed it. It gave him a sense of power, and she was thrilled. She was coming bit by bit into possession of all that the gentry knew, all that made them upper class apart from the money, that thrilled her. And at the same time she was making him want to have her there with him. It was a subtle, deep flattery to him, her genuine thrill. To Connie, Clifford seemed to be coming out in his true colours, a little vulgar, a little common, and uninspired, rather fat. Ivy Bolton's tricks and humble bossiness were also only too transparent. But Connie did wonder at the genuine thrill which the woman got out of Clifford. To say she was in love with him would be putting it wrongly. She was thrilled by her contact with a man of the upper class, this titled gentleman, this author who could write books and poems and whose photograph appeared in the illustrated newspapers. She was thrilled to a weird passion, and his educating her roused in her a passion of excitement and response much deeper than any love affair could have done. In truth, the very fact that there could be no love affair left her free to thrill to her very marrow with this other passion, the peculiar passion of knowing as he knew. There was no mistake that the woman was in some way in love with him, whatever force we give to the word love. She looked so handsome and so young, and her grey eyes were sometimes marvellous. At the same time, there was a lurking soft satisfaction about her, even of triumph and private satisfaction. Ugh, that private satisfaction. How Connie loathed it. But no wonder. Clifford was caught by the woman. She absolutely adored him in her persistent fashion and put herself absolutely at his service for him to use as he liked. No wonder he was flattered. Connie heard long conversations going on between the two, or rather, it was mostly Mrs. Bolton talking. She had unloosed to him the stream of gossip about Tevershall village. It was more than gossip. It was Mrs. Gaskell and George Eliot and Miss Mitford all rolled in one, with a great deal more that these women left out. Once started, Mrs. Bolton was better than any book about the lives of the people. She knew them all so intimately and had such a peculiar, flaming zest in all their affairs. It was wonderful, if just a trifle humiliating, to listen to her. At first she had not ventured to talk Tevershall, as she called it, to Clifford. But once started, it went on. Clifford was listening for material, and he found it in plenty. Connie realised that his so-called genius was just this, a promiscuous talent for personal gossip, clever and apparently detached. Mrs. Bolton, of course, was very warm when she talked Tevershall. Carried away, in fact, and it was marvellous, the things that happened and that she knew about. She would have run to dozens of volumes. Connie was fascinated, listening to her, but afterwards always a little ashamed. She ought not to listen with this queer, rabid curiosity. After all, One may hear the most private affairs of other people, but only in a spirit of respect for the struggling, battered thing which any human soul is, and in a spirit of fine, discriminative sympathy. For even satire is a form of sympathy. It is the way our sympathy flows and recoils that really determines our lives. And here lies the vast importance of the novel, properly handled. It can inform and lead into new places the flow of our sympathetic consciousness. And it can lead our sympathy away in recoil from things gone dead. Therefore, the novel, properly handled, can reveal the most secret places of life, for it is in the passional secret places of life above all that the tide of sensitive awareness needs to ebb and flow, cleansing and freshening. But the novel, like gossip, can also excite spurious sympathies and recoils, mechanical and deadening to the psychic. The novel can glorify the most corrupt feelings so long as they are conventionally pure. Then the novel, like gossip, becomes at last vicious, and like gossip, all the more vicious because it is always ostensibly on the side of the angels. Mrs. Bolton's gossip was always on the side of the angels. And he was such a bad fellow, and she was such a nice woman. Whereas, as Connie could see even from Mrs. Bolton's gossip, the woman had been merely a mealy mounted sword, and the man angrily honest. But angry honesty made a bad man of him, and mealy mountedness made a nice woman of her in the vicious conventional channeling of sympathy by Mrs. Bolton. For this reason, the gossip was humiliating. And for the same reason, most novels, especially popular ones, are humiliating too. The public responds now only to an appeal to its vices. Nevertheless, one got a new vision of Tevershaw Village from Mrs. Bolton's talk. A terrible, seething welter of ugly life it seemed, not at all the flat drabness it looked from outside. Clifford, of course, knew by sight most of the people mentioned. Connie knew only one or two, but it sounded really more like a Central African jungle than an English village. I suppose you heard as Miss Alsop was married last week. Would you ever? Miss Alsop, old James's daughter, the boot and shoe Alsop. You know, they built a house up at Pycroft. The old man died last year from a fall. 83 he was, and nimble as a lad. And then he slipped on Bestwood Hill on a slide as the lads had made last winter and broke his thigh. That finished him, poor old man. It did seem a shame. Well, he left all his money to Tatty. Didn't leave the boys a penny. And Tatty, I know, is 5 years, yes, she's 53 last autumn. And you know, they were such chapel people, my word. She taught Sunday school for 30 years till her father died. And then she started carrying on with a fellow from Kinbrook. I don't know if you know him. An oldish fellow with a red nose, rather dandified. Wilcock, as works in Harrison's woodyard. Well, he's 65 if he's a day. Yet you'd have thought they were a pair of young turtle doves to see them arm in arm and kissing at the gate. Yes, and she's sitting on his knee right in the bay window on Pinecroft Road for anybody to see. And he's got sons over 40. Only lost his wife 2 years ago. If old James Alsop hadn't risen from his grave, it's because there is no rising, for he kept her that strict. Now they're married and gone to live down at Kinbrook, And they say she goes round in a dressing gown from morning to night, a veritable night. I'm sure it's awful, the way the old ones go on. Why, they're a lot worse than the young, and a sight more disgusting. I lay it down to the pictures myself, but you can't keep them away. I was always saying, go to a good, instructive film, but do for goodness sake keep away from these melodramas and love films. Anyhow, keep the children away. But there you are. Grown-ups are worse than the children, and the old ones beat the band. Talk about morality. Nobody cares a thing. Folks does as they like, and much better off they are for it, I must say. But they're having to draw their horns in nowadays. Now the pits are working so bad and they haven't got the money. And the grumbling they do, it's awful, especially the women. The men are so good and patient. What can they do, poor chaps? But the women, oh, they do carry on. They go and show off, giving contributions for a wedding present for Princess Mary, and then when they see all the grand things that's been given, they simply rave. Who is she any better than anybody else? Why doesn't Swan and Edgar give me one fur coat instead of giving her 6? I wish I'd kept my 10 shillings. What's she's going to give me, I should like to know. Here, I can't get a new spring coat. My dad's working that bad. And she's get vans loads. It's time, as poor folks had some money to spend. Rich ones has had it long enough. I want a new spring coat. I do. And where am I going to get it? I say to them, be thankful you're well fed and well clothed, without all the new finery you want. And they fly back at me. Why isn't Princess Mary thankful to go about in her old rags then and have nothing? Folks like her get van loads and I can't have a new spring coat. It's a darn shame. Princess. Bloomin' rot about princess. It's money as matters, and 'cause she's got lots, they give her more. Nobody's giving me any, and I've as much right as anybody else. Don't talk to me about education. It's money as matters. I want a new spring coat. I do, and I shan't get it 'cause there's no money. That's all they care about, clothes. They think of nothing of giving 7 or 8 guineas for a winter coat. Collier's daughters, mind you. And 2 guineas for a child's summer hat. And then they go to the primitive chapel in their 2-guinea hat. Girls as would have been proud of a 3 and 6pence one in my day. I heard that at the Primitive Methodist anniversary this year, when they have a built-up platform for the Sunday school children, like a grandstand, going almost up to the ceiling, I heard Miss Thompson, who has the first class of girls in the Sunday school, say there'd be over £1,000 in new Sunday clothes sitting on that platform. And times are what they are, but you can't stop them. They're mad for clothes, and boys the same. The lads, they spend every penny on themselves. Clothes, smoking, drinking in the miners' welfare, jaunting off to Sheffield 2 or 3 times a week. Why, it's another world, and they fear nothing, and they respect nothing, the young don't. The older men are that patient and good, really. They let the women take everything, and this is what it leads to. The women are positive demons, but the lads aren't like their dads. They're sacrificing nothing. They aren't. They're all for self. If you tell them they ought to be putting a bit by for a home, they say, that'll keep, that will. I'm going to enjoy myself while I can. How'd else keep? Or they're rough and selfish, if you like. Everything falls on the older men, and it's a bad outlook all round. Clifford, began to get a new idea of his own village. The place had always frightened him, but he had thought it more or less stable. Now, is there such socialism, Bolshevism among the people? He asked. Okay, I'll stop at that point and we'll get the answer next time from Mrs Bolton, whether there is socialism and Bolshevism among the people. Listen to the next episode of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Listen to the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover with me, Morel. So, look forward to seeing you then, next episode.